Welcome. You're listening to the Good Girls Don't podcast with Ashleigh
and Verity Mansfield.
This is the podcast where we smash those rules that we've been taught to follow both as men and women and burn the damn rule book. We're tackling the big issues and the issues nobody wants to talk about, and we'll be fiercely feminist about it.
This podcast is about inspiration, education, compassion, and being the change that you need to see in this world. This podcast is for the trailblazers, the freedom fighters, and the soul igniters, and all the women just like you who are ready to break the good girl rules and be heard.
We acknowledge the traditional custodians of Australia and its First Nations people on which this podcast is produced and consumed. We pay our respects to their elders, past, present, and emerging.
Get ready for the revolution. It's coming to you now. It's coming to you now. We're gonna sing it, revolution. And they'll never bring us down. No, they'll never bring us down.
Well, we have such an interesting conversation to have today, Ashleigh.
Yes, we've only been planning this episode for what feels like forever.
Yeah, it's such an important episode, and it's a really personal episode to me. I was going to say personal episode to me personally. But, it's all about miscarriage, and it really is something that we don't talk about. And it's from my experience, it really taught me how necessary it is for us to stop behaving like those good girls and shoving these issues under the carpet and really put them on the table and have such honest discussions and sharing around them. And, miscarriage is something that affects so many women. Shockingly, I think they said there's 282 women a day in Australia who experience an early pregnancy loss before 20 weeks gestation. That's 282 women a day. And that's not even counting. I know, that's not even counting, the loss of a pregnancy after that 20 weeks or stillbirth. These are massive, massive numbers. We're talking about something that impacts over 103,000 couples, Australian couples a year. With 1 in 4 women under 35 years old experiencing miscarriage. And, by the time that we as women hit 35, that increases to 1 in 3 pregnancies. So that's, 1 in 3 pregnancies resulting in a miscarriage. While half of pregnant women, over 40 will lose their baby to a miscarriage. Why the fuck are we not talking about this?
It's something that seems to be incredibly common and really, really quite tragically just not talked about. So, of course, we're going to talk about it.
And not just us either. So we really wanted to share my story about miscarriage and to also invite some other incredibly courageous women to share their stories about their experience with miscarriage. So you're going to meet 2 beautiful women, one called Sandi and the other Bess, who have very different stories. And yet when you hear these 3 different stories about miscarriage today, we really want you to note, and we really want to honour that there are so many more stories out there, different stories that you're not going to hear today. And, what you hear today isn't going to represent the entire scope of experiences that women experience around miscarriage. I had a beautiful friend who by 26 weeks pregnant had to make the horrific decision of whether to continue her pregnancy or to terminate because the baby was suffering such massive medical issues. And they were told the baby might not survive the pregnancy, the baby might not survive the birth, the baby might live for a minute, the baby could live for 3 minutes, the baby could live for 6 months. They didn't know, but they did say to her, this baby will suffer every single possible organ failure that you can imagine. And to have to make those decisions. So I'm just pointing out, we have not covered every single, I guess,
Scenario.
Experience or scenario, and we can't because there's so many of them. And if there's 282 women a day in Australia experiencing a miscarriage, and that's only under 20 weeks gestation, my God, we there's so many more stories out there, and we wish we had the time to be able to honour every single one of those women, but we just don't at this moment. So please accept that, the stories we're offering you today, and please accept that we do honour everyone's stories. And if people do want to, email us or message us with their story, if you want to jump on our Facebook page, for Good Girls Don't Pod, jump on there and share your story there with us as well. We'll be more than happy to honour your story with you. So, Ashleigh.
Without any further ado, I now have the opportunity to ask some very nosy questions of my good friend Verity here about her experiences. So, because you haven't heard enough from Verity already.
She's so quiet, that one.
I know. I actually don't know much about this experience that you have. So I'm going to be learning with everyone else listening about your experience. So please bear with me as with, certain reactions. I may swear a bit.
But I think this is such a perfect point to make as well. You and I have known each other for years and we've never had this conversation.
No, we haven't. We've talked about sexual assault. We've talked about
we've
many.
Talked about pregnancy though, and we've talked about whether or not you want children, and yet we've never talked about
this, so it's going to be a bit of a new one. Bit of a new experience. So okay, let's get really blunt about it. What happened?
So we obviously had fallen pregnant, and then we went to our 12-week scan, and we'd walked into the doctor's surgery or their clinic, and we'd had the scan, and she was looking very confused, and she asked us if we would kindly go sit in another room and not back into the waiting room with everyone else. So we were kind of like, oh God, what's going on? And then we had another person come in and speak to us and break the news that we had, that they couldn't find a heartbeat. So they advised us to go to the main maternity hospital in Perth, which was only a 25-minute drive away, and to ask for, another scan with, their better, I guess, medical equipment.
Okay.
So we went to the hospital, and we had they did an internal scan, and again, they said, we're so sorry, there's no heartbeat. And I think receiving that news was just so traumatic, because it was funny because weeks before I had felt very, very sick, and I literally had to feel like I was being poisoned from the inside out. And I also was so sick at the point of thinking, fuck, I don't know if I want to do this. I don't know if I could survive living like this for 9 months. Because the horrible feelings that I was getting from my body were just so debilitating.
Yeah. Okay.
Yeah.
So, okay, you've gone to the hospital. First of all, I want to ask you some questions about that. So you go to the hospital. Is this something that you go to the emergency room for?
I think so. Yeah, I do. We went into the emergency room.
Oh, okay. Okay.
Yeah, but it's a maternity hospital, so it's not the average hospital where it deals with every single Tom, Dick, and Harry. It's a women's maternity hospital, the one that we went to.
Ooh, fancy. Okay. So I'm assuming, big leap here, that finding out that that there's no heartbeat of the fetus. Does the world start to spin around and not seem real?
Do you know what? The first response that I had was this feeling, because I've been feeling so literally like I was being poisoned from the inside out for those few weeks. My first reaction was, get it out of me. And the idea of having a dead human being inside your body, for me personally, this is not everyone else's experience, this is my sole experience. I was horrified. I felt I don't know how to explain it. I just wanted it out of me. I just felt so repulsed of having a dead thing inside my own body. And I was literally like, get it out, get it out, get it out. That was my initial response, is this horror And this, I
Wow.
guess, the fear as well of like, what's, this, is it decaying inside of me? Like, what the fuck is going on? Like, get it out.
Like, this isn't right.
This isn't right. Yeah. And that's all I remember was saying to the nurses, get it out, get it out, get it out.
So
Sorry.
So at this point then, I mean, what are the options? What choices? I mean, were you given choices?
They gave me two choices. They said, look, you've got basically two choices. One, we can remove the baby for you clinically, where we put you under and we do a D&C, and we basically like scrape out the inside. And they said, or the second one is that you go home and you just naturally, wait for the baby to pass, and you'll probably pass the baby in the toilet. They said you might get a bit of an urge and you'll go to the toilet and you'll pass your baby into the toilet. And I, at the same time as being like, get it out, get it out, get it out, went, fuck, I'm not flushing my baby down the toilet. Like, that is so fucking dishonoring.
It seems a little undignified.
Had baby down the toilet. Like, it was so undignified. That was even more horrific. And so I chose the clinical option, because the option of going home and passing a baby on the toilet naturally was not ever going to be something I was going to choose.
Okay.
And this was about 15 years ago, and things have changed. And you will hear Bess's story. She had a different set of options and different set of support, and you will hear her story later. So things have changed. I'm pretty sure there's more than those two options now.
You would hope that in the time that's passed since then and now that, medicine has advanced a bit.
Yeah.
You hope. So, okay. I mean, can we talk about what the clinical removal is? What is that? Because I'm not familiar with it.
Basically, they put you under general anesthetic, so you basically go to
Ready to sleep with your life.
And, I always like the option of just, knock me out. Do we have to do like any surgery? I'm like, I don't want to know about it. Just do it. And then we're all good. Like, I've had like veins stripped and I've had other little procedures, and I'm always just like, or when I was younger and I had my wisdom teeth like removed, and I was like, yeah, just knock me out. Like, I don't want to know. Just let me.
Fair enough.
I'll sleep through it. It's fine. So I opted for the second one, obviously, and they put me to sleep and they removed the baby. And all I remember was waking up, as you do, sort of very unwithered and out of it and drugged up, and you slowly sort of have that, conscious awakening, and you start going, hang on, where am I? Oh, that's right, I'm in the hospital. Oh, fuck, I've lost the baby. I just had the baby removed. And then I remember kind of like fully waking up, and the nurse was standing over me in the recovery ward, and I looked at her and I said to her, where's my baby? And she said, you've just had it removed. And I said, I want to see her. And I had this intuition that it was a girl. And the nurse said, oh, I'm sorry, but you can't. And I said to her, why not? And she said, well, in the procedure, it's kind of like a vacuum cleaner. We suck it out and the baby gets ripped apart. And I did not know. If I had known that option, I never fucking would have chosen it. I never would have fucking chosen to have my baby torn to pieces. So then my reaction was to sit up and start screaming manically, give me back my fucking baby. Because I'd made the wrong choice. Give me back my baby. And I was yelling, give me back my baby at this nurse. The nurse had to leave me because she broke down into tears and couldn't function and had to actually like stop her shift and go home, because my traumatic reaction, she had no way of knowing how to hold space for that or how to deal with that. And I was screaming so manically. I was upsetting everyone else in the recovery. I don't know if you can imagine just someone just sitting up and screaming and yelling and crying hysterically at the top of their voices, like, give me back my baby, give me back my fucking baby. And they actually, and they don't do this, like family and friends can't come into the recovery ward.
No, it's just doctors and nurses,
They
right?
dragged my mum in. And I think I would have been about 26 at the time. So they dragged my mum in and they said, can you please help us calm her down? She needs you. And so my mum was like hugging me and, stroking my face. And I was in hysterical tears. And it's still like, I can feel that emotion still coming up now.
Oh
But
my
just sitting
goodness.
there and just thinking, I fucking made the wrong choice. Like, I'm never going to see her. I'm never going to hold her. I'm never going to breathe her in. Like everything at that moment, I just felt like someone had taken a baseball bat and had just crushed and smashed my entire world to pieces.
Wow. I
Yeah,
don't really have words for that.
It was so traumatic. It was just, I just don't know. It was just like your heart just got ripped out of your chest, and you don't know whether or not your heart would ever grow back. And the hospital did what they could, I guess. I so hope, and it sounds like when you hear Bess's stories, you'll hear a very different. You'll hear different choices having been made and things that she implemented so beautifully with such wisdom. There are options. This is not everyone's experience either. So the hospital, they did have a really beautiful practice where they give you a little white felt heart, and it's like a little stuffed. It's a 3D little heart that's been stuffed with filling. So it's a little white felt heart, and the idea behind it is that they don't want you to leave a maternity hospital empty-handed, because they know you're going to be walking out those doors with couples taking their babies home.
Oh my
And they did
goodness.
warn us. They said, look, this is so you don't leave the hospital empty-handed. So while everyone, and we did, as we left the hospital, and I think they did give me some sedatives to take home, and painkillers. And so when we left the hospital, I had my mum on one side and I had my husband on the other side. And they literally almost had to carry me out the hospital. And I was just holding on to this white heart. And as we walked out, there was a couple in front of us with their brand new born baby. And that is such a heartbreaking experience. Of staring at this newborn baby and knowing that was not going to be your outcome, that you didn't get that, you got a white heart. And, we went home and I cried an awful lot. And that was really fascinating too. Like, my husband was so incredible. So he held this space for me to break down and to cry hysterically, and he fed me and cooked, and all I had to do was literally cry in bed, cry on the couch, cry on the floor. That's all I needed to do. And then one night, I remember getting up in the middle of the night. I'd gone to bed early, and I'd gone to bed before him every time, so he always made sure that he put me to bed. And I remember one night getting up for a reason, went to get a glass of water. I was thirsty, would go to the toilet, and I walked past the lounge room, and we didn't have a house that was like an open planned living house. It was a really beautiful old kind of cottagey house that, the lounge room had doors closing that off, that the dining room was in a separate room. So you could close off every single room. So I remember walking past and realizing that, he was still up watching television or something. And I poked my head through the door and he didn't notice me at all. And he was sitting there with his head in his hands, bawling his eyes out. So he made sure that whole time that I never, ever needed to hold space for him. And when I confronted him about this, he was literally like, I'm here for you. Like, you and your emotions come first, and I'll deal with mine when you've gone to bed and you're asleep. And, my husband and I are now divorced, and we don't have the easiest relationships. But that is one memory that always sticks with me, where I think I was so fucking lucky to have a man who knew at that point that I had no capability to hold anyone else's emotions, let alone my own, and who made that sacrifice for me. And I absolutely do honor that so much at such a deep level. But it
That's
does raise,
amazing.
It really was amazing. And it really does raise, I guess, a really important discussion as well that, people react differently to miscarriage. And I don't mean the women that have the miscarriages, because we do as well, but I'm talking about the the people who witness your miscarriage.
So can we, I just want to backtrack for a second.
Yeah.
Because this is kind of incredible. I'm guessing, like, given the state you were in, you're not exactly paying attention to booklets, pamphlets, or paperwork that might be thrown your way from the hospital. But I'm just
I
curious.
don't remember any.
Okay, I'm not going to ask you that question then. So then let's skip ahead a little bit then. The next couple of days, like, I'm assuming things are pretty raw. You said that you were a mess, crying everywhere, but I mean, how do you tell people? Do you tell people, and what kind of response do you get? Do you get support?
I mean, I think we were lucky in terms of we had, thank God for text messages where you don't have to ring up and say it. You can send a text, and you can send that text to like everyone, that you want to know. And I think Neil did that, where he was just like, just letting Verity lost the baby. And yeah, so obviously my mum told my brothers and sisters and my stepdad that was fine, my siblings. And so that part was covered. So I really just needed to tell my friends, and then I kind of left it for Neil to tell his family. We did have an incident where when we told his brother and sister, his wife, they were like, oh my God, can we come over? And Neil said, oh, look, they want to come over. Can they come over? And I said, no. And this, I think, was the first day we just got. I said, no, I don't want anyone over. I don't need anything from anyone. I just want to be left alone in my grief. I just need to process this. I just need to cry. I don't want to be entertaining people. I don't want to be having to deal with anyone else's emotions, their tears, their sadness. Like, I don't want to deal with any of their stuff. I'm dealing with mine. And I was really adamant, I do not want them to come over. I do not want them to come over. Tell them not to come over. And Neil came back and said, I'm so sorry, but they're insisting on coming over. And so they came down, and I was just dreading it. And they came down, and I thought, well, at least they're trying to be supportive. And they had just gotten married, I think maybe a few months before. And anyway, so his brother's wife sat me down, and she said, look, we've actually got something to tell you. And I was like, oh, what's that? And she said, well, oh, this might cheer you up, is what she said. And I was like, what's that? And she said, well, you know how we beat you to getting married? And I was like, oh, yeah, whatever. Because Neil and I weren't married at that point. She goes, well, we're now going to beat you to having a baby. And I don't think I've ever wanted to punch someone in the face so much at that moment, when you've just literally lost your baby and someone comes up to you and is like, no, we're going to beat you now to having a baby too. We win, you lose.
Talk about good girl rules, right?
Oh, I would never, every single time I hear that woman's name, I always think of that moment, and just, it's not that I haven't forgiven her, I will just never, ever forget the lack of compassion, of humanity, of basic empathy, of sensitivity, of her reaction to that. And that just, I think that just caused even more trauma. To be in trauma and then to have someone almost like poke fun and shame you for it, and to use it against you so they could feel better than you, is just a horrible, like, that's just a horrible human being as far as I'm concerned. So, there was that extreme of a reaction from people. And then I also had friends they'd come over, over the next few days and weeks with chocolates and watch movies with you, and, try and just like, you don't have to talk, we'll just have hot cups of tea and sit together and just keep you company as you kind of move through this. But then after a week or two, they'd be like, well, haven't you moved on yet? Like, really? Like, isn't it time to get over this? And you just see, I don't know whether anyone gets over losing a child. I don't think, and you know what, some people do. Some people, they do experience miscarriage and they are like, oh, well, it is what it is, and they're able to move on. It's everyone's experience is different. And mine was that I was absolutely fucking heartbroken. And that heartbreak didn't end when I lost the baby or the next day. It wasn't like just having a bad hangover. And so, you know, the range of reactions from people can vary really greatly. To another friend I had that was always beautifully supportive and always full of empathy, and who like wrote a card, sent us a beautiful card, you know, for the loss of our baby. And then, you know, my mum, it was really fascinating because my mum was really upset with me. But I don't think it was till I was pregnant again and I went to my mum's house to break the news. And I waited till I was 12 weeks pregnant this time to tell her. And I said to her, we're pregnant. And she turned around and she said, why did you have to tell me? And I said, well, at some point you're going to find out. Like when I started turning up like really fat.
Or I don't know, there's a kid running around somewhere.
It's calling in like grandma. But her reaction was, why did you have to tell me? And I remember going, what do you mean? And she said, I don't know if I can go through this again. And it was really interesting. It wasn't like, oh, you know, are you okay? It was her emotions. And I didn't realize until the second pregnancy of how much that it impacted my mother, and she hadn't shared with me. The loss that she had felt was so deep for her. And that was really an incredible moment of looking at my mum and just feeling even more support in a way, because I got that she got the loss. And
Wow.
that was so beautiful to see that in her and to recognize that you know, how much it impacted her. So there were so many different varieties of, I don't even hear my dog, he's like growling on the background. There were so many different reactions that are involved with miscarriage. And I think it's so important to talk about all of them. And I think it's so important for people to know that if you have had a miscarriage, you're going to get a whole range of emotions from different people and reactions. And if you are the person who is witnessing someone else having or going through miscarriage, you know, just be really conscious of your own reactions and emotions, and not making that person responsible for your emotions. And also just having like super sensitivity and talking to them about it. Don't brush it under the carpet. Don't treat them like the miscarriage never happened. Because it did happen, and it might not be real for other people, but it is real. It's not something, it wasn't, you know, a ghost that they were pregnant with. It was real.
So, I mean, wow. Yeah, okay, we're going to talk more about that, I think, towards the end. I'm curious to ask, in the weeks and days and even months following the procedure, were there any follow-ups to recommend a therapeutic support to help you work through it?
Do you know what? There isn't. And I think that's something that Sandi brings up so beautifully. There wasn't any professional support offered. There wasn't any counselling offered. There was no follow-up. Like when you have a baby and you go home, they check up on you. When you have a surgery in a hospital and you're knocked out, usually your doctor will check up on you and make sure that, you know, you're recovering fine, or you go back to the doctors to make sure that the stitches have healed or whatever else. There was none of that for a miscarriage. There was no one to check up on you and say, oh my God, like, are you okay? And I find that really disturbing. I hope to God, like we're talking, my experience happened 15 years ago, and I'm really hoping things have changed now. But at that point, there wasn't. There was no support services. And I think if you listen to Bess and Sandi's stories, and I could be wrong, I know I should really check in with them. but I don't think there was anything actually offered. They had to go seek it out.
That's a
And
bit
I just
strange,
find that
hey?
really sad. I find that absolutely sad that even medically, even though they know these statistics, 282 women a day are having miscarriages under 20 gestation weeks. Why isn't there support? Why isn't there mandatory counselling? Why isn't it, like, would it be so wrong to actually force counselling where you actually have to go turn up and then do, either a mental health check just to make sure that you're coping? And some women will be like, look, I'm totally coping. This is fine. Like, it is what it is. And then other women will be like me, where they just can't get up off the floor. And neither is right or wrong. It just is what it is. But if there was some kind of mandatory counselling, um, I think it would be so much more helpful for women, because, and it's something really beautiful. I can't remember which of the gorgeous ladies, I think it was Bess, raised this in her story that you'll hear later. It was like, there's heaps of people who will say, if you need anything, let me know. Let me know. When you're in crisis, you do not start reaching out to people saying, hey, can you bake me a lasagna? That'd be really great. When you're in crisis, you are hardly even thinking straight. You're just trying to emotionally get through every second of the day. You're like, second by second, minute by minute. You are not planning. And so I think it's really important sometimes, and Bess phrased this so beautifully, to have people say, hey, I've left you a lasagna on the doorstep. Hey, I'm going to come over. I've got dinner sorted for you tonight. You don't have to speak to me. Just open the door, take it, and you don't even have to invite me in. Hey, I'm in your area. I'm driving past. I'm going to come in and do your laundry for you. That was one of the things that Bess was saying, is someone had offered to do laundry for her. And kind of forcing that help, because as women, we really suck at, one, asking for help, and two, accepting help.
Even when we desperately need it.
Especially when we desperately need it.
So I've got questions. You said that your miscarriage took place when you were at 12 weeks, right?
Yeah.
What's the difference between losing a baby at 12 weeks versus 26 weeks versus a stillbirth?
Well, I think, obviously, besides the obvious, there's a point when you do miscarry or something happens with the baby, and the baby dies within the pregnancy, that there's a certain number of weeks, I don't know whether it's at 20 or whether it's at 26 weeks, where there isn't the option to have it surgically removed. You actually do have to give birth to a dead baby, which is, I can't imagine. It's happened to a friend of mine, and I cannot, even though she's told me, I still cannot imagine the depth of emotion that someone must feel having to birth and go through, like, labor, because birth isn't a 2-second deal. Do you know what I mean? It can go for 12 hours. So actually having
For
to
longer.
birth, yeah, yeah, exactly, like, for days even, but to actually have to birth a dead baby, I can't imagine the trauma that must do for women. And maybe for some women it doesn't, but I know for other women it really, really does. And I think that's the point. That's probably the perfect answer, is it's so hard. There are so many judgments, and I've heard so many people say, well, if you miscarried at 9 weeks or 12 weeks, it wasn't really a baby. And those conversations are so harmful and hurtful. And I really want to tell people just to keep your fucking opinion to yourself. If you're going to take the experience away from someone, shut up. Like, you don't need to say shit. You just need to, like, whatever your opinion is, if it's going to be a negative response, if you're going to hurt that person's feelings, if you're going to take away from their experience, if you're going to tell them that their baby wasn't important, hardly existed, you really just need to shut it, because you have no idea of what that baby means. And I think one of the other ladies, said it so beautifully, that she was shocked. She was shocked by the intensity. It really took her by surprise, that emptiness and that hole within her after miscarrying. She never expected to feel that connection at that point. And it wasn't until she lost her baby where she was like, oh my God, like I didn't realize that, you know, I had all of these hopes and all of these dreams and all of this love for something, and that's gone. And I think that's what we need to remember. It's the love, it's the hopes, it's the dreams, it's all the, you know, aspirations that we have already building up inside of us, and often subconsciously that we don't realize we have them, or that the depth of those emotions, until it's suddenly gone. And you know, you cannot compare loss. Loss is loss. It's like saying that it's more valid to grieve someone when they die at 80 than someone when they die, you know, at 60, or someone when they die at 12 years old. It's like saying, well, look, they're only alive for 12 years. Like, really, how much loss? Someone at 80, they've lived so much more. There's more experiences to grieve, more people to grieve them. It's like saying that. And you
Yeah.
can't. It's not fair, and it's not ethical.
Wow. Okay. You're so wise.
But people do it, Ashleigh, and this is the really horrific thing. People will judge. If you've lost a baby early, you can expect so much judgment from people of saying, well, shouldn't you be over it? It wasn't real. It wasn't really a baby. And I think that is just so, I think, one, it shows ignorance, but it also shows a lack of empathy and compassion. And probably because we don't talk about this, we don't share our feelings. There's not enough women standing up and saying, do you know what? Was important to me, and I want to share my story. This is how it felt. So that people can go, oh wow, it's actually real for those people.
Yeah. So, look, obviously you got pregnant again because you now have 2 girls.
No, I stole them.
Yeah, I thought you did. And look, to be honest, I'm pretty sure one of them came from Coles and the other one from Aldi. So, I mean, how did it feel to be pregnant again? And I don't know, from where I'm sitting, I can imagine that another pregnancy would be full of anxiety about, you know, is it going to happen again? Is something else going to go wrong? Did you have that?
Yeah, I just remember, I remember falling pregnant, and I remember thinking, fuck, like, I don't know if I'm ready to have another baby, because I'm still grieving the last one. And is it kind of like when you buy a child, a new puppy, when the puppy's died, and they're like, I don't want that puppy, I want the dead puppy. And so there was that kind of feeling like, well, hang on a second, but I, you know, and then there was a feeling of guilt, like, oh my God, what if, you know, am I allowed to possibly love, like, if this pregnancy works out, am I allowed to love that child more than I loved the one that, you know, miscarried? There's so many, you know, complex emotions that can be around it. And I remember this fear of thinking, what happens when this baby's born and I don't feel any connection to this baby because I want my other baby instead? And I was really scared. I was really scared I wasn't going to love this pregnancy, this baby, as much as what I had all this love for this other one.
Wow.
And I remember just being full of fear. Every single niggle, every single little cramp, every single bump, every single moment you can't feel a heartbeat. And that's worse because you spend, like, you know, I think the heart's the first thing to develop, and obviously it's beating the whole time, but you can't actually, like, you'll only hear the heartbeat if you go to the doctors, or it only starts kicking when it gets to like around 26 weeks or something. So you spend so much of your pregnancy having no idea or any sort of sensations really.
Just kind of freaking out.
That
like,
go,
oh
it's still here, it's still here, it's still here. It's like you can't touch it. You can see that you can see this belly, but you don't really know what's going on inside of it until someone does an ultrasound or until it starts kicking. And then even when the baby did start kicking, it was like, if it didn't kick for a day, I would go into such fear and anxiety and stress. And then it would kick again. You're like, oh, was that really a kick, or was that something else? Or, you know, was it gas? And you were just like, oh my God, like,
do I just need to fart, or is that a baby?
Yeah. And so, yeah. And then it's like, oh my God, what if there's nothing inside there? And it's a phantom pregnancy, even though you knew that, you know, you've had scans already. Like, your brain can just go all over the place with it, and there can still be so much fear. And I think, again, that's where counseling is so important for women who have had miscarried and who are pregnant again, like that support for them if they haven't been able to recover, or if they haven't known how to recover or whatever. But if that fear and anxiety is still there, like it's so important for them to have someone to reach out to and to help them through that anxiety of a second pregnancy.
So how did it feel when you brought your first baby, Olivia, home?
Oh my God. I remember when I had a cesarean due to health reasons, and I remember the doctor giving me, like, handing over the baby, and we knew very early on that it was a girl, and we'd called her Olivia. And and I love the name Olivia because Olivia means bringer of peace. And I just remember the doctor handing her to me, sorry. And the first thing I said to him was, "Can I keep her?" So I still unconsciously had this feeling of, am I allowed to take her home still? Like, and the doctor just cracked up laughing. He just looked at me like I was a crazy person. And he said, "Look, I don't want it because I think they're going to think all day because I can't take them all home." And everyone was laughing and I was laughing, but it really kind of hit me that there was still that surrealism of, is this real? Even though I was holding her, is this real? Is it safe? Do I actually get to take her home? Is someone going to take her off me? Is something going to happen? And unfortunately, she was born with a bit of fluid on her lungs, and she ended up they had to take her away from there into the little baby neonatal ward, and to just get enough oxygen into her. And so I was separated from her for probably about a good 4 or so hours. And I'd said to my husband, "You make sure you go sit with her. Do not leave her side. Don't let anyone take her." I was still so paranoid of, being able to keep her, kind of thing, and of losing her. And so he went and sat with her, and I'd got taken back to my room, and then Neil came back up to check on me. And I just remember going, "What are you doing here?" And he's like, "I came up to check on you. Do you need anything?" And I was like, "Yeah, you've left her alone? Like, get down there. Like, oh my God, you've left her alone. Like, anything could happen. How do I know if she's safe if you're not there?" And so he obviously, he went back and sat with her until they actually brought her back up and put her in my arms. And they put her in my arms. And if you've had a Caesar, you can't get out of bed because you have catheters and all these tubes and things, and you're hooked up to machines. So the nurse lifted her and put her in my arms. And it was probably somewhere around like 8 o'clock at night. And it wasn't until the next morning when the lady came in at 7 o'clock in the morning to check on me, and she said, "Why are you still holding your baby?" And I said, "Well, first of all, I can't actually get up to put it down."
Oh my goodness.
But I had held her that whole night, and I had not slept that whole night. I sat there watching her. I remember lifting up a blanket and counting her toes, checking her fingers, making sure she was all there. And just kind of like going, "Yep, okay, we're fine, she's still here." And
Definitely.
then the moment, just, yeah. And I remember getting into the car when we finally take her home, and just kind of, that feeling of always wanting to make sure that she was safe. And then we got home, and I carried her inside, and Neil had gone to check on something or other, and I put her down in her cot. And I'd been very conscious of this whole time of, oh, how do I feel about this? Yep, I absolutely love her and adore her and worship her. And how do I feel about Grace? Yeah, there's not really any guilt there. Like, I love and adored her too. So we named the first baby Grace. And so I was like, okay, this is all really cool. Like, this is good. This is nothing that I've been fearing. So then I put Olivia down in the cot. And literally, as I put her down in the cot, my knees gave out and I fell on the floor. And all of a sudden, there was this massive overwhelm of emotion again. And I was bawling my eyes out. And Neil came running in, going, "Oh my God, what's happened? What's happened? We've just got the baby home." And I just said, "We're home free." I said, "Home run, like home run, we're free." I said, "It's fine, she's here." And he was like, "I know she's here. We brought her home."
But oh my goodness, doesn't
my
that say so
trauma
much
was
about the
just
stress
like,
you've been
"She's here."
carrying?
Yeah. And we don't always
Wow.
realize it. And I think this is why it's so important that we do the work, that we have that support, that processes and counseling is put in place, because the trauma is real. Um,
Wow.
and it can run deep, incredibly deep.
So, do you have any rituals, maybe, or I don't know, did you do anything to honor the loss of Grace?
Yeah, so when we lost Grace, I remember going to my mum's house and I said to Mum, I've written a poem for her. And my mum read the poem and she burst into tears and I burst into tears and we're all crying in the kitchen. And that's really beautiful. And my mum said, look, should we look at getting like a little headstone at one of the cemeteries? Like there's a baby cemetery and there is a cemetery for stillborns and miscarriages.
Mm-hmm.
And I was like, gosh, it's so far away if we do that. Like, I don't want to have to leave my house and travel half an hour down the road. So we discussed a few different options, and uh, Neil and I decided on two things. The first thing was that we went down to the ocean, and I went down with my siblings, Hannah and Nick, and Neil, my partner. So it's just the four of us, and we brought flowers, and we threw the flowers into the ocean, and we all just stood there and had that like our little ceremony and to say our goodbyes. And then we also went and got a beautiful little baby bracelet and we had Grace um, engraved. And we bought a really beautiful box. It was a really beautiful wooden carved box from Oxfam. They're absolutely gorgeous. And we filled that box with her baby bracelet, with her scans that we did have. And also because we had early scans as well when we first found out we were pregnant, because I'd bled earlier on. And the little white heart that we came home from the hospital, and cards and a little teddy bear someone had given us when they found out that we were pregnant, and just all the little notes that people had given us, um, to do with Grace. So,
That's
and the
really
poem that I'd
beautiful.
written. And that box lives in our living room. It lived in my bedroom for a really long time. And then, funnily enough, I went to see this lady who was psychic, and she picked up on this young girl. She said, there's this young girl around, and she looks actually quite like you, and like curly brown hair, and she's kind of like with a grandfather figure. Like, and he's saying like, I've got her. Like, she's with me. She's safe. And I was like, oh my God, that's my dad. And I said, I know who that little girl is. I said, it's Grace. And she said, look, apparently, she goes, look, she's got this really odd. And I hadn't explained anything about this to this woman. And she said, there's a box. She goes, there's a wooden box. And she wants you to put this wooden box with a rose quartz crystal and a clear quartz crystal, like on, she goes, I don't know how to describe it. It's like a wooden bench. And it's got a fairy. There's some kind of fairy above a wooden bench. And she said, does this sound like anything you could do? She said, I don't know where can you buy a fairy? She goes, I really don't know, I said, I'm just giving the information. And I burst into tears because in our TV room, and I call it the TV bench, that's what I refer to it as, is a wooden TV bench, and it's where it sits is these glass doors. And when we bought the house, the house already was like this. It had this big round sticker, like a stained glass window kind of sticker of a fairy, and that's literally above the TV bench on the window.
Oh, wow.
And I was like, oh my God. And it was funny because we had a piece of rose quartz, we had a piece of crystal quartz just sitting there. And I said, yeah, I know exactly where she wants to be. And she said, yeah, she wants to be in the living room. She goes, she feels she's tucked away when no one sees her. She wants to be part of your family. And just to put her box. And she said, you know what her box is? And I was like, yeah, I know what her box is. And they said she just wants to be in the family. She wants to be a part of the family. And so, yeah, we had this really beautiful, I guess, experience where we felt like she was with us and she really was real. And on an energetic level, she's still around us. And so that was really comforting to have that. And so, yeah, Grace's box is now in the living room.
That's
And it's
amazing.
really funny that it's called a living room. um, you know, um, And it's funny because the girls have asked about the box, and they've gone through the box, and they've asked, you know, who Grace was, you know, early on. I think Lila might have been 3 or something. So they've always been very aware of having had this energetic sister, I suppose. We refer to her as our little angel. So they're very aware that they have this older sister, Grace, who looks down on them. And they love this. They love this concept of having their own personal, you know, sort of like guardian angel called Grace. And
That's really
Olivia loves the fact that her name's Olivia because it means bringer of peace. And when she was born, I really did feel like this child, Olivia, just put my world back together. Like my world had fallen apart. And I just feel that her existence just set the world back, you know, on its axis where it should have been. So she really, you know, her name is so perfect for her. And Lila has this, so Lila's name is Lila Joy, and it's kind of this meaning that, you know, you are my joy. And she does, you've met Lila, she just brings joy to everything. And a couple of years ago, I went to pick her up from school, and the girls were like, hey, Mum, it's Grace's birthday today. And I was like, yeah, you know, it would have been. And Lila had spent the day telling everyone that we were going to go out for dinner and celebrate her dead sister's birthday. Now, it sounds really cute, but actually having to go to a school and having people look at you going, you're celebrating a dead person, like their dead sister's birthday. Like, it sounds so grim. And Lila just looks at it with such joy. So she was like, come on, Mum, let's go out for dinner and we'll celebrate her birthday. So we've gone to this Italian restaurant, and Lila has decided, she would have been about 7 at the time, to tell the waiter that we're there to celebrate her dead sister's birthday. So everyone's looking at us with horror and with like sadness. And,
Oh my God.
And I'm like, no, it's fine. It's fine. Like, we're good about it. Please, you know, you don't have to worry about our emotions or feelings.
Give us free booze and we'll be fine.
Yeah, free champagne. And Lila insisted, they put us on a table of 3, and Lila said, no. She said, my sister needs a place. So she made sure that it was a table of 4. And they, you know, she made the waiter actually set a place for Grace with like knife and forks and glasses and a plate. And then people, and another waiter would come, oh, have you got someone joining you? And I was like, oh my God, like, how do I keep explaining this to people? Because I was kind of like so caught up in, oh my God, people are going to think we're fucking nuts. And I was laughing at it. Like, it was
Spoiler
funny.
alert, you definitely are.
Yeah, and then, yeah, I mean, but to have, you know, I was really indulging that my children's were feelings around this. And I think that was actually really quite beautiful. And I think that's something that we miss when a miscarriage happens. We miss having people take it seriously, people joining in the honouring, people joining in the ritual. I remember when my friend lost her baby a few years ago, and every single year on her birthday, I would send her a message and say, hey, it's her birthday. Like, you know, just thinking of her and sending you all love. And she loved that. She loved the fact that she hadn't been forgotten, that this baby didn't just exist for her, but existed in the outer external world. And I think that's really important as well, that when we do that for people, we take that acknowledgement and ask people, do you want to celebrate it? Do you not want to celebrate it? You know, how would you like me to show up for you in this? What's important for you? How can I be there? And we don't do that because we don't talk about miscarriage. And that was one of the biggest things when I did have a miscarriage and I did start talking about it. All of a sudden, the stories came out of the woodworks. And, you know, like Neil's mum had 7 miscarriages, and someone else had 5 miscarriages, and someone else had a miscarriage, and someone else had 2 miscarriages. And I was like, where were these stories before? Like, why don't we talk about this? Why do we hide it? Why do we sweep it under the rug and pretend it never happens? Why do we not honor all of these stories and all of these little lives, you know, that come to us and leave so early? It's incredible. We have so much shame in society around miscarriage and guilt. I think we feel incredibly, I remember hating my body because I just remember feeling it failed me, and I failed my baby. My body failed my baby when it miscarried, and just having so much shame and guilt around that. And we just don't get it. We don't get it. We don't talk about it. And it's sad. It's really, really sad that we just don't do that.
Yeah, there's a lot you've just packed into it. There's so much in there. So much. Look, I've got two questions for you to wrap this bit up, which is, first of all, how does it feel, all these years later? It's been about, 15 years or so?
Yeah, it's been about 15 years. And, like still talking about this earlier, I did get teary, but it's not like I always look back and I always think, oh, that was such a massive thing to have gone through. And, there was so much to learn there. And,
Well, this is a perfect segue because I was going to ask did you learn, was there anything that, sort of came good out of the experience? Did you learn something or?
I think it was really appropriate we named her Grace, because when we think about Grace, it's kind of all about blessings and honors. And I think that there is that feeling that we do have to just surrender to things that we can't control. We can't control everything in our lives. And sometimes the rug will I know, I hate to break it to you, Ashleigh. Sometimes the rug can be completely ripped out from underneath your feet. And we really do have to find something to believe in that's greater than ourselves. And it really taught me a lot, I guess, spiritually, of understanding there's a whole new world out there I had some understanding of, but never really fully tapped into. And there was a point where in my grieving and in my sadness, I remember sitting in my bed, bawling my eyes out in the middle of the day. And I had my head in my hands. And then all of a sudden, and I was sitting against a wall. And I just all of a sudden felt this very warm hand on my back, and this warmth just spreading through my whole entire body of peace and calm and love. And it was a very quiet feeling, but it was so incredibly soothing and healing. And I turned around and no one was there. And that just feeling of being, there is something that's further out there than ourselves that we don't always understand or tune into or tap into. And just knowing that, we are never alone, that we have no idea, what's on the other side. But just because we lose something doesn't mean that it's gone. And sometimes we just need to surrender. We need to surrender to the things that we can't control. And that unconditional love is unconditional. That you can love someone that you've never met, that you've never touched and you've never felt, and you can hold that love for the rest of your life. And, knowing that, I think the other things that I learned, I guess, was that we need to do that healing. We need to, and you'll hear Bess's story. It's so incredibly beautiful what she did in order to create her own healing. So she took control of it, which was so. I wish I'd heard Bess's story before I'd ever fallen pregnant the first time. I wish I'd had her knowledge. I wish I'd had her wisdom. It would have been such a more empowering and probably. I wouldn't have carried, I don't want to say less traumatic because you can never compare, but the healing would have happened so much sooner and possibly so much more effectively.
Yeah.
So yeah, finding that healing, finding that support. When you have a birth plan, have a what if plan. And that was something that you'll hear in Sandi's story about the need to have a what if plan. And how that every single midwife should be talking about this to their to the mothers, to the pregnant women that they deal with. Being mindful about our relationships. And you'll hear Bess's story as well about her relationship with her husband and the importance of turning inwards in terms of a crisis, and not to judge the other person, not to judge other people, but to really be mindful of your relationships, and to find a way to honor your loss. We went in through, flowers at the beach into the ocean, and other people have their own little ways. But finding a way to honor that loss and making it real. So it's not just some imaginary loss, but it's a real loss. That acknowledgement is so crucially important. Sharing your stories, and I think all three women agree on this. It's such a hard story to share, but when we do, there's so much beauty that comes out in it, and it's necessary. I wish women had shared their stories with me before I'd even fallen pregnant or knew about miscarriage. And to share your pregnancy, like, it's really funny. It's quite ironic because so many people don't share their pregnancy early on in case they have a miscarriage. But yet it's such a it's like the catch-22. But if you don't share with people early on, how will anyone understand your loss? And it was because we had really beautiful friends that shared our loss, that cried with us, that grieved with us, were we able to heal in those ways. Because people got it. People had shared all the joy, and people had shared all the, oh my God, I wonder what they'll be like, and oh, we can do this with them, and like have all of that, joy and dreams and hopes for them. So when we lost that, they lost that too, and we were able to support each other. They were able to support me. So even just finding a few trusted peeps that you really do trust, that will be there for you, that won't judge you, to share early on, from the beginning, from the minute you pee on that stick.
That's beautiful.
And just, yeah, I think those things are so important, because they also, in the sharing, we really release their shame and guilt around the loss. And I think that is incredibly important, so that we can have that support system that helps us to break through all of those shitty emotions that we don't need to be carrying.
Wow.
And just allowing us to heal.
I love it. I think it sounds like that thing that we've always sort of said, which is, sometimes you can't choose what happens to you in life, but you have to take responsibility for your recovery from it.
Mm-hmm.
Like, it's your responsibility.
Absolutely.
Random things happen in life, but it's how you bounce back, and you're responsible for that.
Yeah, and I really did not know how to bounce back from it, and stumbled my way through it. And you'll love Bess's story that we'll share with you. She had two aspects that were different from mine. One, she created her own brilliant support system with a variety of people that helped her to heal and move through and process her experience. And when you listen to her, when she shares her story, there's a really beautiful feeling like she's really dealt and processed so much of her story. And she's actually pregnant now, so it's really beautiful as you listen to her story. And then also the other one is that, she opted to be able to, I guess, pass her baby at home. So, and she was very supported in that choice. And that was really beautiful as well. Like, when I wish I'd had that option. I wish I had that that empowerment, I guess, in how I could, possibly make it look for me, instead of thinking I only had to choose what the nurse that day happened to tell me. So I think that's incredibly important. So yeah, you're going to love Bess's story, and I think it's just such a perfect example of why we need to talk about miscarriage, and the impacts of it, and why we should be sharing our stories.
Yeah. Amen. Hallelujah. We've solved it. We fixed the problem of miscarriage shame.
Miscarriage shame. Yeah.
It's really strange, because obviously I don't have children, and that is for the most part by choice, and I've never been pregnant. So it's really interesting to hear the stories of miscarriage, because to me, like, I've grown up in a family that's a little bit disjointed and blended, and my mom had her last baby when I was 21, so I'm nearly 30 now, and he's an absolute joy, my little brother. So I have witnessed my mom go through pregnancy after pregnancy after pregnancy, 5-6 times. And I've witnessed her go through a miscarriage. And, I was quite young. Well, when I say I was quite young, I think I was about 19 when she had a miscarriage. And I think, again, I was about 15 when she'd had another one. And I didn't know. She didn't really share with us what was going on. We just knew that mum wasn't well. She had to go to the hospital and have some stuff done. No one ever really told us what was going on. So it's really fascinating, because I've always found the topic of childbirth and pregnancy a little bit, I don't want to say that I've hated it, but I think because I was around it so much when I was a teenager, I I don't know how to explain it other than to say, like, I was kind of over it.
Yeah.
You know, like, I mean, my teenage years were basically like, I was a nanny for my younger siblings, and there were a lot of them. There were like every 18 months, my mum was having another baby almost. So my teenage years were full of changing nappies.
Nappies.
The only thing I didn't do was breastfeed them. Like, that's the only thing I didn't do. I did everything for them before and after school and on weekends and everything else. So for me, hearing stories like this, it's really strange. It's the only thing I can say. I mean, I certainly have a bit more empathy and compassion, but I think it's one of those things that I'm not going to fully understand because I don't have the lived experience.
And I think that's so key, though, to the conversation is if you haven't had the experience, you can't comment on the experience or judge the experience that someone else is having. And because even if you have had an experience of miscarriage, the variables can be so different within that
Yeah.
you still can't compare the stories
No,
either.
you
And
can't.
you're going to hear that in the next story with Sandi. So Sandi experienced miscarriage, but she was also going through IVF. So they had, issues that kind of compounded, and her experience again of miscarriage is completely different from Bess's and my stories as well. And I think one of the most incredible things that she brought out, because there's also similar things that I think all three of us as women touched on, was that we need to have these plans in place for miscarriage. The support is already there, the structure is already there before crisis happens. So you're now going to listen to Sandi's beautiful sharing, and it's a really beautiful sharing as well. And you'll notice with Sandi's story, there's a lot more emotion. You'll hear her voice, it in her voice, which I think is another beautiful reflection of how different we all are. Bess was able to describe her experience with such beautiful grace and just in such a way where you feel like she's done that work. For me, who's actually probably still has never done the work, and was fighting back tears. And then you'll hear Sandi's story as well, as her experience has evolved as well, and you'll hear the beautiful emotion in her voice. So I just think it's so important for us to never judge anyone's experience, because none of us have ever lived any other human's experience. We've had similar experiences, but they're not all the same.
Yeah, and I think it's the wonderful kaleidoscope of life, really, isn't it? Like, even though we might have so many things in common, all of our circumstances and situations are uniquely our own, and it'll be more or less challenging for each of us as we move through it.
So tune into Sandi's story.
Do it. And of course, I want to, before we wrap up the whole of this episode, if this has brought anything up for you, we'd really encourage you to seek some therapeutic supports if you need them. Talk to people, look into some counseling. I think there's an organization called SANS that people can contact. We'll see if we can find their phone number and put it in the show notes for you, because tough topics like this can bring up a lot of stuff. And trauma is a weird thing. It sits dormant for a long time and it can resurface randomly without warning, and we want you to be supported.
Yeah, definitely. So please do find that support. Please, talk to your caregivers if you are pregnant or about to get pregnant or looking at getting pregnant, that you do have a plan in place, and that you really do identify the people in your life who can be part of that support system. Now, you can do it clinically through, psychologists or counseling, or you can also add in other beautiful elements like Bess did as well, of whether, having a massage therapist or acupuncture or whatever it is that you choose to do for your own healing. And just making sure that, if you are out there listening, if you know of someone who has experienced a miscarriage or who is pregnant, that you make sure that you do provide a really safe space for them that they know that you're someone, you know, who can be that person for them, who can hold that space for them, for their emotions, for any fears, for any anxiety, and, you know, just for no judgment, and just be a part of their what if team. And I think that's probably really the most important message that we can give out. And if you are someone that has experienced miscarriage and you really want to share your story, jump onto our Facebook page and Good Girls Don't Pod and share your experience with us. Let us know that you've listened to the episode, and share away. Like, we love people being able to share their stories, and, you know, being able to then as well offer you guys that support and acknowledgement that you have been heard, and, you know, that your experience was real, your baby was real, and that your love for that child is real regardless.
That's all there is. That's all the words. You've said it perfectly.
Yeah, and those two places, sorry, Ashleigh, you did mention it before, SAND. There's an organisation, SAND. They do help with stillbirth and miscarriages, any kind of form of pregnancy loss. And there's also Pink Elephant, who's they're a miscarriage support place in Australia as well. So there's those two places if you need more information or any support. You know, we do urge you to reach out to either Pink Elephant or to SANS.
Okay, I think for this episode, that just about wraps it up, and we will see you next time on the Good Girls Don't podcast.
So starting with the story around our miscarriage. So we experienced what's called a miscarriage, which means that when we went in for our 12-week scan, we were told that sadly baby didn't have a heartbeat. So in the lead up to this, I had no signs, no symptoms. So to come into that scan and learn baby didn't have a heartbeat was a little bit of a shock. Well, it was definitely a shock because there was nothing to suggest that everything wasn't going as it planned to be. In terms of baby birthing or passing, we made an informed decision with the support of the medical team to use what's called medical management. I know many people have had quite different experiences with this, but for us it was ultimately a really positive one. So we were able to do this at home. So I was in my own environment, my husband was there, and it was really just at our own time. So we had the medical management at home, so we took some medication, which ultimately helped pass baby, and thankfully for us, our experience went really smoothly with no complications. So ultimately, of course, it's not a choice I would want to make, but with the support of the medical team, we were able to make a decision that worked really well for us and ultimately allowed for a sort of a positive experience in terms of birthing baby at home in our own space at our own time with the support I needed around me. In terms of how I felt initially, if I think of my first reaction, it's quite interesting because somewhere in me I feel like I knew something wasn't quite right. You hear of mother's intuition and sometimes you hear stories, but it's very hard to put into words, and I just wanted to share it for those who may have sort of experienced something similar, or maybe they haven't. But for me, somewhere I felt maybe I knew. A few weeks before the scan, I'd had this dream where essentially the dream had been that something was really wrong with baby. And I woke up in this terrible, this terrible state of anxiety, with this feeling like something was really wrong and I needed to see baby or check in on baby's well-being in that moment. I ultimately put it down to first-time mum anxiety, but from that moment there was just this little niggle or whisper that maybe something wasn't quite right, which I guess ultimately turned out to be accurate. However, having a thought that something is not quite right is very different from the reality of someone advising you that unfortunately your baby doesn't have a heartbeat. So I think initially it was just that shock and sadness, which evolved into a feeling of, the best way I can feel it is just this feeling of emptiness. It was like a really physical feeling of emptiness, and I don't think I realized that grief is such a physical response in your body. It's sort of like I felt this hole or this emptiness that just wouldn't fill. And look, I tried filling it with food, I tried filling it with online shopping, distractions, but like nothing would fill this void or this hole I was now feeling. And if I'm completely honest, I do work in the field of sort of pregnancy, birth, fertility, and of course always had so much empathy for women who had experienced losses, but the intensity of what I felt for such a little human that had made, who was in our lives for a relatively short period of time, really, to be honest, took me by surprise. So it's just that it was more that emptiness and that hole that was feeling, which, and just the physicality of it all was really quite intense and something I had never really realised. And look, that may be a little bit naive, but yeah, the intensity of it all really, really shook me and took me just by surprise. I was really lucky, or we were really lucky. We had shared our pregnancy with a lot of our close friends and family. So, I mean, of course, I had my husband for support, was relatively supported by what's called our local early pregnancy unit, the medical team there. And as our family were aware we were pregnant, we did share with them that we'd experienced our loss. And although there was no sort of physical support or coming to see us support, it did feel really nice that everyone was feeling our sadness, and not that's to the same extent, but experiencing some emotion and sadness in the support, and just letting them know letting us know that they were there for us if we needed them. I also turned to a created bit of a practitioner village around me. So I saw an acupuncturist, which was really amazing. And one of the biggest aspects of support, which I found so beneficial, was finding a local fertility massage or womb massage therapist, which was such a nice experience, that sort of that massage, that touch and that healing, because it worked on grief points and that somatic healing as well, which was really important for me. The other thing was I chose this time, or felt this time, it felt really important to me to use this time to go inwards and use the resources I already had. So for me, felt I was really lucky in the support I had, and felt a lot of what I needed was my own sort of space to process what had happened and start working through it. In terms of thinking about what I'd maybe wish I'd received, or what I'd better known in terms of support, when we first found out we had our loss, we were referred to a local GP who advised us that our only option was to go to the emergency department, which, with the medical background, I had no symptoms. I knew would be quite a traumatic wait for a very long time in an emergency department when I didn't need to go to an emergency department. So after a lot of research and crying into the phone and imploring the people I was speaking to say there must be a better option. We did discover an early pregnancy unit in our local hospital, which was ultimately something that helped everything be a smooth experience. If I'd known about that, it would have saved us a bit of stress and trauma. Trauma of working through what we were going to do, because I was quite adamant I was not going to be sitting in an emergency department, given that I had no symptoms at all. Of course, if that had changed, I would have reconsidered, but at that point, if we'd known that this service existed, it would have saved me a lot of stress in that initial period. To be honest, we weren't really referred to a lot of support services. I found a lot of them on my own. Pink Elephant Network is one I found, so I'm based in Australia, was a really good one I found. But for me, I got a lot of benefit of just sort of looking into my own things, and I know what works for me, and the support for me, I didn't feel I needed too much more. The one thing I think I would have really loved is I really appreciated family and friends saying, let me know if you need anything. But I think I really would have loved someone just to come around and say, maybe give a bit of warning, but just to come around and say, look, I'm going to do all your washing for you, or here's a meal I've prepared, or just do something really practical rather than prompting us to reach out, because I didn't really feel like that was something I wanted to do or felt comfortable doing. I know I could have, but if someone had just said, here's a meal, or here's a dessert, or let me do all your washing, I think that would have really felt like such a nice little gift as well. So they're probably the few things that I would have really benefited from, or felt would have increased how I was supported in that time. I have already mentioned that my family was really good. I was pretty, in terms of those around me, I was really lucky in the sense that although maybe our family wasn't quite sure what to say, they did try and understand what space we were in and be relatively careful with perhaps what they were saying and sharing with us. I did experience a few thoughtless comments, more from the workspace, like, oh, you'll get pregnant again, or it'll be fine, or things like that. But I do know the people who said them did say them with sort of the best intentions. So overall, I do feel like most of the people we interacted with or who we shared our story with were relatively sensitive to the situation. I did spend a lot of time processing, integrating, and trying to heal from the experience myself. So I guess in that initial phase of sort of maybe the month, I didn't really feel the need to necessarily share our loss outside our initial circle. However, as time passed, I sort of felt I was in a place to start sharing my story with sort of close friends and a little bit of a wider circle. And what I did find was interesting is that the more I shared my story, the more others shared their story with me. So although I would say a lot of people maybe didn't quite understand the loss or the depth I was coming from. It was really quite an interesting experience sharing my story with others and hearing so many women I didn't realise had experienced losses as well sharing their stories. But I definitely feel like there could be much better spaces to share stories about loss, because there were a few spaces I did find where I could have shared my story, but it was not the right time for me, so I had to take myself out of those stories, out of those spaces, because I found them a little bit too stressful for me. So it is quite tricky to find the right place to share your story, and I guess that's, for me, I was lucky in that regard as well, to find spaces to share. And I was very discerning about where I did share my story. Where I did share my story. I have to say, experiencing a miscarriage has probably been one of the most impactful experiences of my life. Initially, the short-term impacts were really just that realization of the intensity of all your feelings, and that realization that not only have you lost your precious baby, you've lost all that future you'd envisaged with them and all the plans you'd made for them and your family. I did spend a lot of time in that initial phase sort of withdrawing from everything, just to process what had happened and really take time for myself. My relationship in that initial period was from the get-go and the medical management side of things and the initial loss. My husband was absolutely amazing in supporting me. However, when we started to go past maybe that first week or so, he had managed to sort of work through it a little bit quicker than me, and maybe didn't affect him in different ways. And when we sort of got to that point, there was quite a bit of tension in our relationship for a few weeks there, just because I was feeling quite misunderstood, and I'd sort of got to this phase where I was angry. So I've never felt so angry in my life, and I am not an angry person. So that was really something I was a bit taken aback by as well. So there was that short-term impact where we had that tension in our relationship, which ultimately, when I worked through what I was feeling, we were able to work through what we were going through. So ultimately that's had no long-term consequences, but that initial phase, I'd be lying if I didn't say we had a few quite epic disagreements, and my anger levels probably didn't help things there. So, but it also, that short-term impact was like really showing me how to prioritize myself as well, and not feel guilty about it, because I did not have the capacity to do to focus on anything else. It was like, I need to feel this, I need to let it all out, and I don't have the time for anything else. So everything else sort of became a little bit not as important in that short term. In the longer term, I would never, ever choose to experience the loss of a baby again or a miscarriage again. But I have trouble referring to my experiences as negative, because in the long term, it did teach me a lot about myself. So it showed me what I can cope with, what I can heal from, helped me tap into some of the resilience I didn't think I had. And it did show me that, you can learn from all experiences. And I would definitely never, I don't think I had to have a loss to learn these things, but given I did have it, it was definitely, I learned all these things about myself that I might have taken a little bit longer to learn if we hadn't experienced it. While most of the learnings have been, for me, quite insightful and quite positive, the one that has had a long-term impact is a subsequent pregnancy. So we are lucky enough to be experiencing our second pregnancy now, which is going really well, which is wonderful, but it did really affect that first trimester, like the anxiety levels, the not quite sure if you can connect to baby or want to connect to baby because you're really not sure what will happen, having to just trust everything's okay. So really that the first trimester of this pregnancy was really quite stressful, and while we're in our second trimester and everything's looking fantastic, that what if keeps creeping in a lot. It keeps creeping in. So really the long-term impact is that effect it has had on a subsequent, or the more negative ones is this subsequent pregnancy, and the not only the what ifs, it's sort of when you're pregnant maybe the first time, or even I guess if you've not had a loss, there's this sense that it's all going to be okay, and you don't need to think about anything, you don't have to worry about. It's just this beautiful, beautiful bubble. And I remember feeling it when we were pregnant with our before our loss, and I just can't quite find that same level of I think pure happiness that's not touched by anything. There's just this little whisper that goes, oh, what if? So I think realistically I'm possibly not going to be feeling that like that untouched excitement and happiness until we're holding our baby in our arms towards the end of this year. So it's been interesting, that long-term realization that it does affect your future pregnancies. And so I guess if I was to think of all the maybe little bits to share, or from my experience, if I was to make, gosh, hope not, but if ever to experience another loss, or if someone said, I really don't know what to do at the moment, like what are some of the things that really helped you get through your loss or heal through your loss? I guess really for me, it was about taking time to heal. So I took time off work, which I was really fortunate to be able to do. So just really taking the time and realizing it does take time. Finding a little village of practitioners to support you. So for me, it was I had acupuncturist, the massage therapist, and also I did see a psychologist as well. But knowing that I had those people around me to offer insights that maybe I couldn't think of in that moment was really helpful, and I trusted them all implicitly to support me through this. Share your story. Sharing your story, I've found stories are medicine and a little bit of magic, I find, and sharing my story was a big part of this for me to work through it. Be discerning with who you share your story with. You don't have to share it with everyone. It's up to you who you share it with, but sharing your story with trusted friends or family or anyone you feel comfortable with can be very healing, just to have someone witness you, and they don't have to give you advice, they don't have to share anything themselves, just listening to you share. I found that to be really beneficial to me as well. Feel everything. It feels horrible in the moment, but you've got to feel it to work through it. I cried a lot. I don't think and for me that was just a really good way to let it all out. Cry, let it all out if you can. You will always remember your baby. There's no world in which you won't remember your baby. However, you will be able to work through it and keep moving forward. You don't move on, but you do get to this place where you are able to keep moving forward while still being able to honour the experience you had and that little baby that touched your life. So I think if there was any wisdom to share, those would be the main things that helped me sort of work through the experience I had and start to integrate some of the things, some of the things I experienced.
Hi, I'm Sandi Friedloss, a freedom fertility formula specialist based in Perth, Western Australia. I became a mum in 2012 after 3 years of trying to conceive with IUI and IVF. And along our journey we had some losses, and miscarriage took me to a dark place emotionally and mentally. And that's part of the reason that I do what I do now, helping couples to do their fertility journey with some better resourcing and assistance in this day and age. So during my own fertility journey, I often felt overwhelmed with questions and emotions and overthinking and managing the social aspects of work and life around my fertility treatment. At its most challenging, I was just getting by day to day. It took me some time to process the loss of our first IVF baby, and in truth I wasn't entirely ready for a second round of IVF when we decided to give it another go. In truth, I know that I would not have been able to cope with another failed IVF attempt at that point, and so it was more good luck than anything that the next round worked. I want to talk about the first loss for a moment though. In preparation for our first IVF round, we were told that there were no guarantees and that things might not work out. And that's one thing to accept that mentally before the event, but having put so much time and effort and emotion into getting to that point where you get the positive result, I was prepared to do anything for that baby to be a reality. We were so set on being parents and so ready, but something wasn't right. I was very sick with this baby. The problem with IVF and miscarriage is that you're so hyper aware of the timings and the results because everything is so incredibly monitored and tested and evaluated to be able to see where you're up to, what stage you're at. There's no guesswork in this stuff. And so we knew we were pregnant within that 14 days of transfer, and it was brilliant. We were so happy, but we were also careful not to tell too many people because of the usual don't tell people before the 12 weeks scenario. And we'd had a long time to come to this point where some people knew we were trying, and we didn't want to squander that joy with things going wrong. We didn't know anything was going to go wrong. We were hoping like hell it was going to go well for us. But I was really sick, and I think that might have been my body's way of telling me that this probably wasn't going to stick around. So again, being IVF, we knew really early. So I had 2 weeks of hoping I was pregnant, and then 3 weeks of knowing that I was. I kind of look on the miscarriage as a bit of a blessing in that regard, because I was really not well. I was constantly feeling I was going to be sick. I was constantly nauseous, constantly dizzy. I was eating my weight in ginger pretty much all day, trying to avoid being sick. And then I got to the point where I was trying to make myself sick to try and feel better. And there are other things like discomfort and an amazing case of thrush, which I'd never had before. And then the inevitable happened for us. We lost the baby. There was heavy bleeding and a heavy period, and it was very apparent that it was all over. And I suddenly felt physically so much better. Mentally and emotionally, though, I was a zombie. I couldn't believe that we'd gotten this far and it still didn't work. I couldn't believe that I was still no closer to holding my baby. Now, this happened in November of 2011, and is a great time of year to have this sort of thing happen, really, because everybody's inviting you out to do things and socialise, and I didn't feel like crap because I was pregnant anymore. I just didn't feel anything because I wasn't pregnant. I was numb and disoriented, rudderless. I had no ambition anymore. I just wanted to stay home and hide and not do anything. And it took me a long time to realise that what I was doing was falling into a bit of a depression, and that it wasn't healthy the way I was behaving. It took me a long time to understand that I needed help, but eventually I spoke to a counsellor and got the support I needed to be reassured that this wasn't going to be my new forever. This wasn't going to be how it was going to be. In truth, I know that I would not have been able to cope with that next IVF being a failure. So really, I'm glad that it went ahead and went well. I don't know what would have happened to me if we had not had a success, or if we had lost along the way. We transferred 2 embryos the second time. We had to do a full new round of egg harvest to get to that point, because the one that we'd had on ice from our previous round had degraded in the freezer, and we weren't able to use that again. So we had to go through all the needles again, and all the protocols, and all the timings, and the blood tests. And luckily we got 5 eggs from this retrieval, and 3 fertilised and turned to embryos, and we requested that they reimplant 2, that they transfer 2, so that we could have a better chance of success this time. And we had to sign a waiver to say that that was all okay. But we went ahead with it thinking, well, if we get 2, then that's our family done. We don't need to go through any of this trauma again to have another child, because our bodies just weren't responding the way that they were supposed to. So both embryos implanted, surprising us at the 7-week scan to find that we were having twins. And I'd just gotten used to the idea of having 2 babies at once, when sadly at the week 11 scan, one of the bubs was missing in action. Let's have a look-see then, my obstetrician said to me as he put this cold ultrasound wand on my belly. And he counted them out loud. There's 1, and then the silence as he swished his wand a further figure 8 over my belly, and then he confirmed, I'm afraid there's only one here. I'd learnt enough about grief the first time around to know that while I had one baby still implanted and transferred successfully, that I still had to grieve for the one that was no longer there. So that day was incredibly bittersweet. We had one healthy baby growing, and I was truly grateful for that, but I needed to mourn the loss of the other one so that it didn't come back to haunt me later in terms of having unfinished business to deal with. I did some journaling. I did some time on my own. I reminded myself how fucking grateful I was that this other one was still sticking around, and I did everything I possibly could to try and hang on to this one as well. I stood in my backyard with a bobble wand and dipped it in the mixture and blew bubbles out through the back door and watched them float over the garden and into the distance. And I did that until I could stop crying. And I found that to be a really cleansing, releasing way of saying goodbye, because the hopes of having twins had floated away as well. Now I realise that many pregnancies don't make it even that far. Countless miscarriages go unnoticed as late periods or assumed regular periods. And it's only because the IVF process is so monitored and the tests and scans are so early that we even know that it had been there. The week of the first scan with the twins, I had been such a mess, hoping for a positive result and terrified that it wasn't going to work, that I'd left my phone at home, so I had no video of the scan. But I will never forget the feeling of seeing those tiny flashes of its heart pumping in green and black on the monitor. When I finally told my mum that we were pregnant, I told her that those little flashes on the screen looked to me like tiny seahorses. And she thought that was the most wonderful thing, so she got me a stuffed seahorse to put in his room and keep there until we were ready to bring him home. Miscarriage is such a personal and intimate experience, and no one can tell you how you should feel. After our first loss, it took me a while to realise I wasn't okay, and I hope that people have the opportunity these days to know that without guarantees, that the supports need to be there in place whether things go well or badly. And I would recommend that people have a plan in place. Much as you have a birth plan these days when you go to hospital, it's a good idea to have a what happens if list of people you can call, of services you can access, to be able to support you through whichever eventuality comes to be. So again, I say miscarriage is such a personal and intimate experience. It's different for everyone, and no one can tell you how you should feel. You can be angry, you can be sad, you can be frustrated, you can be despairing, you can be all of the above, and you can also still be grateful. It's okay to not be okay, but please don't feel alone. Speak to your friends and family, and I'll bet you'll find that it's a more common thing experienced by many of the women you know than you ever realised. And that for all of us it's just as horrible and heartbreaking as it is unfair. If you haven't had a loss, then I hope you never feel that way. I wish you only success in your quest for children, but please know that the reality of trying for children is that there are no guarantees. Not even the most expensive, qualified doctor can guarantee that you will fall pregnant and stay that way and take home a healthy baby. There are so many things that need to go right for that to happen. When my miscarriage happened, I had never felt so broken or unable to function at a basic level ever before. I'd been able to throw time and money at an issue and fix it. I had that fundamental feeling of being unable to reconcile how easy it was for other people to fall pregnant. I mean, it's a basic human function. Where was I going wrong? How was I stuffing this up? Why is it so difficult for us? Am I not meant to be a mum? Is this my karma? Have I done something wrong? And all of those thoughts were swirling in my head as I was numb and operating on autopilot in that November and December before trying to get help and sort my stuff out. Later, I'd realised that with all those thoughts swimming in my head, that the problem we were having was between my ears and not between my legs. That all the doctors poking around in there trying to find out what my functional capabilities were and my hormones weren't the issue for us personally. For some other people, a blocked tube could be the reason. But for us, there was no physical impediment for moving forward. I think maybe I was just stressed out and putting so much pressure on myself to fall pregnant that my body shut down and went into an emergency state. And that flight-fight mode is not somewhere that a body is happy to fall pregnant and grow a baby. It's too busy running from this stress that I had created, this pressure that had turned my basic brain, my fundamental feeling brain, into feeling like there was a physical danger, because it doesn't know the difference between what's going on physically and what's going on emotionally and what's going on whether it's actually going to hurt me or not. And so my body just refused to reproduce until I was ready to rest. I was ready to surrender to the process and have the reassurance that I guess I was enough as a person whether or not I had children. I was enough for my partner whether or not I had children. And it took me a while to actually have that conversation with him to say, look, if this doesn't work out, what does that mean for us? If we're not going to be able to make our own baby, what do we do next? Are we going to be enough for each other? Or do I lose you too? And he was wonderful. He just looked at me as if, what are you talking about, woman? Of course we'll be together. Of course this is enough for me. And that was a wonderful release for me to know that all this pressure I was putting on myself to make him happy wasn't going to be necessary, because he already was happy. We were already enough as a team together. So I've talked about how I would cope initially, how I coped initially, and how I was a wreck and numb. The sort of support I wished I'd received at the time, I would not have known how to reach out because I was in such distress, which is why I would hope that resourcing is such these days that when you visit a clinic, they give you a chance to work out what's your plan from here. If things work out, great. If they don't, what are you going to do next? And that's part of the reason that I'm doing my helping of women and couples, is to be able to be that voice of reason that says, yes, you've got all your tests in a row, but what happens next? Have you given yourself a chance to be secure as a couple first, and planned out what happens if things go well and what happens if things present a new challenge, and how to go through those with each other on your side?
Hey, if you want to continue this conversation, head over to our Facebook page and be part of the revolution. You can find us at Good Girls Don't Podcast on Facebook. Please note, we cannot create change alone. Your support, likes, comments, shares, and iTunes reviews help us to give a voice to the insanely inspirational women and the controversial issues that we discuss.
If you'd like to be a part of our podcast, or if you have an issue that you have a burning desire for us to bring into the light, please contact us. With fierceness, Ashleigh
And Verity.
Get ready for the revolution.